Welcome to the Latte Lounge podcast. Join me, your host, Katie Taylor, as we talk balancing hormones, busting myths, breaking taboos, boosting libidos, and bolstering confidence. This series is brought to you in partnership with the Latte Lounge Plus, the new online menopause clinic where you can get online appointments with an experienced menopause doctor, a personalised treatment plan to manage symptoms and prescriptions, if right for you, delivered to your door, all for just £45 a month, and that includes prescriptions too. So check out the show notes for more details on how to get your appointment booked in. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to menopause expert Dr. Emma Ping. The perimenopause and menopause can be a very turbulent time, particularly for women with ADHD. We'll be talking about how the symptoms of ADHD can be exacerbated by fluctuating hormones and why so many women are diagnosed in midlife. Dr. Emma Ping is passionate about offering women holistic, evidence-based advice and support. She's a member of the British Menopause Society and International Menopause Society, and as a midlife woman herself who's experienced symptoms of the perimenopause, she appreciates what a positive difference good advice and treatment can make to how you feel about your quality of life. Dr. Ping has a special interest in ADHD, particularly in women, and how hormones influence symptoms. She works with the Menopause Clinic with Dr. Naomi Potter. Welcome, Dr. Ping. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's lovely to be here, Katie. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, before we sort of talk about ADHD, I just wanted to sort of say that a lot of women obviously don't even know that perhaps they have it, and often come to us in our Facebook group sort of talking about feeling either lazy or disorganized and confused, and really are not sure whether it's to do with menopause or just their sort of general, everyday sort of personality, I guess. So I thought we'd start by just sort of having a look at what is ADHD, and maybe you can sort of let us know, is it hereditary? Is it something we're born with, or do we develop with it over time?
So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which unfortunately is a term which doesn't really represent what it actually is, which is in itself at the very start rather confusing. And it also misses out a very important part of ADHD, which is emotional dysregulation, which isn't part of the DSM criteria, but has now more recently been found to be very common in ADHD people. Probably about 90% of people have this emotional dysregulation. So there's three domains. There's inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And when you're diagnosed, you can be diagnosed with predominantly inattentive type, predominantly hyperactive and impulsive type, or a combined type of ADHD. It affects around 5% of the adult population. And for women, unfortunately, historically, we've not been recognised as people who can get or have ADHD. But now we know a bit more, but it's been the last 10 years or so, really, that women have been recognised as potentially having an ADHD brain. And in the medical model, it's talked about as a disorder, but actually within the ADHD community, understandably, they don't necessarily want to be labelled with a disorder because it actually is a neurodifferent brain. It's a neurodivergent brain. And the word disorder itself has negative connotations and taboos, and which, understandably, some people don't want to be associated with. But unfortunately, because it requires medical attention and it requires things like studies and investigations, it doesn't get that unless it's in a medical kind of model. And there's lots of things going on in an ADHD brain. There's sort of three underlying things going on. So there's some areas of the brain which develop more slowly. Now, some people will say that those areas of the brain catch up after 3 to 5 years, and other people will say actually for some people those areas remain smaller in the brain. There's also differences with regards to neurotransmitters like dopamine and noradrenaline. And also there's some bigger connections between different parts and areas of the brains which are disrupted. So sort of three things going on in the background of an ADHD brain. In terms of the underlying cause, majority is genetic. It's strongly inheritable. It's 80% inheritable, which is as inheritable as height, actually. So if you have been diagnosed with ADHD, there's a very strong chance that there's somebody within your family, very close to you, who also has ADHD. However, there are other possible underlying causes due to environmental factors. So as a baby, if when developing in the womb, if you're exposed to maternal toxins like alcohol, smoking, stress, have shown that that might give you more tendency towards ADHD. And also postnatally, as a young child, if you're exposed to extreme trauma or distress or neglect, again, your brain can develop with those ADHD differences. But mostly it is genetic, yes. And we know there's many genes involved in ADHD, actually.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you usually hear of ADHD, you imagine it as a sort of young boy who's running circles around his parents at school and getting into trouble. And actually, some of the things that you were saying is what I hear a lot from in women in our community who just don't want to even go for a diagnosis or possibly even accept it because they don't want to be stigmatized or
Yeah.
and they don't relate to that classic, child running riot around a classroom. So, I mean, what are some of the classic signs of ADHD in women that perhaps that you see in your clinic as well?
Well, I guess the classic signs are based around the inattention and the impulsivity and hyperactivity, and it affects the woman's life profoundly in every part of their life. For a man with ADHD, that whatever their symptoms are, it's a more of a steady level playing field throughout their life. While for women, because they have hormonal influences on their ADHD, it's a more of a changeable picture. And many women will say they are long-term chronic people pleasers. And that's because as girls at school, they've shown actually that girls with ADHD try incredibly hard to fit in and to do the right thing and to mask their symptoms. And thus they're less likely to be picked up because they try so hard, but also they become long-term people pleasers. And it affects their self-esteem. Many women that I see carry a real sense of shame about their feeling inadequate because they can't do things or feel they can't do things in the way that society expects. They might find that their house is messy. They interrupt people when they're talking. Communication, relationships are difficult because they're these emotional sensitivities. Women with ADHD are more likely to get somatic symptoms like migraine, headaches, and nausea. They're more likely to also get secondary comorbidities like anxiety and depression. And if they do have hyperactivity, it might be much more subtly represented like fidgeting, or it might be internalized, so very, very busy brain. Women often feel they haven't reached their potential in life, and that they feel sort of some grief which comes along with that. But yeah, the shame and low self-esteem is very pervasive and very heartbreaking to see when women talk about it. Time blindness is a big thing as well. So that's part of organisation. The concept of time can be quite different for somebody with an ADHD brain, which again affects everything.
Yeah, for sure. But then, all these, I mean, this is fascinating to me. And I'm thinking out loud of quite a few people I know that could tick these boxes. So, I mean, why do so many women go undiagnosed for so long then?
Well, as I say, as a girl, you're more likely to have the inattentive type. So that means they're less likely to be disruptive at school. Their behaviour is likely to be quite tolerable in the classroom because also they're trying so hard. So they're not picked up because they're not disruptive. They're not picked up because within the education and medical world, traditionally it was thought that it's boys and men. So, the radar's not out for girls. And then women compensate greatly for their symptoms. So they're missed off, which is, it's a great shame.
Yeah. I mean, I want to sort of get on to how you would get a diagnosis, but before we get to that, um, why can they be exaggerated as we go through perimenopause and menopause? Because again, you know, I hear from a lot of women who sort of don't seem to have remembered sort of suffering that badly, but they've sort of hit this midlife and menopause stage, and they're noticing some of the things that you've just actually outlined being, you know, a lot more evident.
So it's an area of medicine where there is still lacking in evidence and studies. It's a female issue which hasn't been looked at as much as we'd like. We do have some studies and some data. It's not as robust as we would ideally have. But what we understand is that one aspect of ADHD is low dopamine in the brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front of the brain, which is involved in executive functioning and emotional regulation. And we know that dopamine has a relationship with estrogen. Again, we're a little bit unclear whether it's exact amounts of estrogen, or is it actually a variation of estrogen that becomes the problem, or maybe it's a bit of both. But estrogen and dopamine are connected in the ADHD brain. And we know when estrogen is there, if your brain is well scaffolded with a good amount of estrogen, then your dopamine works better. It's more, if there's more of it, there seems to be more available. It seems to break down less readily. And the receptors for dopamine seem to be more sensitive. So your brain works that bit better when your estrogen is steady and at a good level. But in the perimenopause, we know that estrogen starts to decline and also have these big swings. So, and we know estrogen alone can cause some of these ADHD symptoms like the brain fog, forgetfulness, and the emotional problems as well. So there's an overlap between the two symptoms, the two effects of the low estrogen and the low dopamine. So for women with ADHD, they have the perfect double storm of both things in the perimenopause. And because women often have put in things in their life to manage their ADHD and cope with their symptoms, even if at times they felt they've at the point of overwhelm and burnout, they've often coped. But the perimenopause and that estrogen changing and dropping off suddenly makes everything so much worse. And we have got a study to show that women with ADHD have more severe and more frequent perimenopause symptoms, about 2 to 3 times more. So that's why. And I think also women might be more aware of it also, because midlife women are often it's often a time when their children are being diagnosed, because their children might be going through puberty and teenagehood, and that's a common time when girls are diagnosed with ADHD. So that in itself might also prime them to think, it might be reflecting on themselves and their lives really, about whether there's some things in common with their child. But so the perimenopause and menopause can be a really, really difficult time. And women just feel that they are falling off a cliff, that everything is going out of control. It's very frightening. And often if they don't understand what's going on, it can be profoundly damaging, really.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something which I wanted to pick up on. Actually, in the Midlife Festival last year, for those who are listening, you can watch back the Midlife Festival. I interviewed a lovely lady also about ADHD and menopause, who mentioned that the lack of dopamine, that she often sees people who start to have suffer with things like alcoholism and
Yes.
binge eating disorder. And she was saying that that's because they're kind of trying to sort of get more dopamine. So they're sort of, starting these unhelpful habits.
Yeah.
And I suppose then that's the vicious circle you've got, isn't it? If you're seeking dopamine and eating perhaps highly processed food to feel that high, or turning to alcohol or whatever to sort of feel something, then that affects your menopause symptoms and make things worse.
Yeah.
You kind of sort of hit the nail on the head. Women are not only dealing with all these sandwich generation issues of everything that we're juggling, but then you've got your hormones and then sort of self-soothing. I mean, you wonder how any of us are still standing. So how can you get a diagnosis then? I mean, what would your advice be to women? Because I'm sure, you know, for some, getting that later life light bulb moment must be quite scary, really.
I'll answer the first part of that first, Casey. So in terms of getting a diagnosis, you want to find a trained clinician. It doesn't have to be a psychiatrist to get the diagnosis, but they need to have had the training and the certification that they can make the diagnosis. Unfortunately, there's no biological marker for an ADHD diagnosis. You can't do a scan, you can't have blood tests to make the diagnosis. It's an assessment. And many people listening to this might say, oh, I've got some of those. That sounds, that could be me. But actually, the assessment looks at all the symptoms, how long it has affected that person. To meet the criteria, it has to have started affecting them below the age of 12. And it puts, it's a very broad assessment. It takes a long time. And anybody who's trained to do that assessment can do that. If you wanted to explore whether ADHD medication would be helpful to you, you'd have to then see a psychiatrist who could also potentially do the. But I'd look for somebody who's a specialist in ADHD. And if you want to prepare for that appointment, there's some self-tests you can do online, which actually some of them are really quite good. There's one that's called, I always forget the acronyms, ASRS, Self-Reporting ADHD assessment, which you can do yourself. It's got 2 parts to it. There's a really good resource called Attitude Magazine. They have a website, and on there you can look for female-specific self-assessments. So that might be somewhere to start, actually, to see whether you're likely to be meeting that diagnostic criteria. Because actually it's all to do with degree of impairment, which is in itself a bit, it feels a bit fluffy, doesn't it? And degree of impairment actually is partly depending on the demands of your environment. Because actually our society is really fit and made around a neurotypical brain. For neurodivergent brains, ADHD brains, the demands are very hard. It can be very overwhelming. Or some people have managed their life and changed their life such that it is more manageable for their brain. So it's a tricky one. It's a big assessment. So you need to find bottom line, somebody who knows what they're doing, and maybe do your self-assessment to start with as well, which might help you see whether it's worthwhile. And the second bit to that was, what happened? So what to expect? So you're worried. You're worried about getting a diagnosis. Should I do it? Am I giving myself a label? Am I just going on the bandwagon? Women feel these things, particularly when they've got shame and low self-esteem. They're questioning themselves all the time. That's the nature of an ADHD woman. They just tend to question themselves all the time. But actually, a diagnosis can really be incredibly helpful. Now, emotionally, when you get a diagnosis, it can be actually quite a range of emotions, which is worth bearing in mind. Some people initially feel elation, validation, really pleased to finally understand themselves. And then what can follow is a kind of grief for what could have been, which can be really difficult. And then there can be real anger about the past, and a kind of a range of emotions, which can be really quite a journey for a woman. It's worth bearing that in mind and giving yourself a lot of compassion and kindness and time after you have a diagnosis, because it can be a real emotional thing to go through. But I would say having the knowledge can really help you understand yourself, empower yourself, and seek the appropriate help for you, and therefore get the most of the rest of your life that you could possibly get. It's quite difficult on the NHS to get diagnoses. There's very big waiting lists classically, unfortunately. There are the private routes, but yeah, so some people in the ADHD field will say, when's the best time to a diagnosis for ADHD? Well, it was probably years ago. When's the next best time? now.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely something to consider if you're thinking you're likely to have it, because, I think that knowledge can make such a difference. And also it can also make you more compassionate to your friends and your family that will also perhaps have it, and you can look upon them a bit more compassionately as well.
Yeah, and I think it's like anything. I mean, it's like the whole perimenopause journey I went on, and lots of other women have gone on before me, is that you've suffered for so many years and perhaps have not been diagnosed or misdiagnosed. And then when you finally get the right diagnosis, you're thinking, okay, thank God, I'm not going mad, and there is a
Yeah.
reason why I'm like I am. And you feel relief. But then, as you quite rightly say, I remember feeling really angry that I'd wasted so many years of good quality life. But I think, you need to kind of go through both of those emotions and then come out thinking, okay, now I know this, how am I going to, as you say, live the rest of my life, feeling more empowered. And, I do feel so sorry for some women who I hear who, it broke up their marriages, or they left their jobs, or even school when they were younger, they were labeled as, someone who was lazy or disorganized. So, I totally agree with you when you say have some, obviously, self-compassion. But so let's sort of turn to, you get that diagnosis, hopefully, and it hopefully doesn't take too long. What are the different sort of treatment options that you could be offered? I mean, obviously, let's look at the sort of medical side, but I'd also love to know sort of holistically what we can do, if at all anything, to help with, how we're feeling.
The really good news about ADHD and getting a diagnosis is it's incredibly treatable and manageable. So that's the wonderful thing. There's an array of treatment options, and no one is the option. Is the solution. You're going to need to use more than one solution. But it is actually very responsive to medication, and there's stimulant and non-stimulant medication. And it's about 80% effective for ADHD, which is incredibly high for any area of medicine. So that might be something to explore. As I say, there's the stimulants and the non-stimulants. There's different types of stimulants and non-stimulants. There's different products in terms of how long they last, short-acting, long-acting, liquids, tablets. And the key with any management with an ADHD situation is it's got to be individualized. It's got to be multimodal, really. So medication might be something to explore. It's a bit like hormone replacement. It's a bit trial and error. It takes a bit of time, but actually, once if you get the right dose, it can be really life-changing, a real game changer. But there are side effects, that it can make people feel anxious, affect mood, affect sleep, affect appetite. That's a few of them. And therefore, women might either find they don't find one that suits them, or they hit a level with the medication and they can't go any further with it. So if you feel hormones are affecting you and your ADHD, that is definitely something to consider getting an assessment and some help with balancing and stabilizing your hormones to give your brain the scaffolding to do the best it possibly can. And then holistically, it's been shown that exercise can be very helpful. Diet, and it's the same with menopause, to be honest, with the diet. It's the Mediterranean diet, avoiding processed foods, avoiding high sugar foods, which is very, very difficult for ADHD women. And when ADHD women come and see me and I talk about lifestyle, I say you've got to be gentle on yourself with this, because it's even harder when you've got an ADHD brain to put in these perfect lifestyle strategies. And there is a tendency to really want to be a sugar craver because of the dopamine hit it can give you. So, but ideally, you don't want big peaks and troughs of sugar. High omega-3 diet, so lots of good oils and oily fishes are very good for that. Meditation and mindfulness. And you think, people look at me and think, meditation and mindfulness and ADHD, how can that possibly go? But what I would say is it has been shown to really help. but you need to do a meditation or mindfulness practice, which involves you also doing something else at the same time. So maybe it's a walking meditation, or something you do while you're running, or something you do while you're knitting. Because for an ADHD person, generally to sit very still and do something like mindfulness is a huge ask, you know. So it's trying to combine it with something else that suits you as well. CBT for ADHD also can be very helpful. Relaxation, getting good sleep is really good for any brain, as we know. But typically, insomnia and sleep disruption is very common in ADHD. We don't exactly know why, whether there's a fundamental difference in the brain, but we certainly know that ADHD brains can be incredibly busy and difficult to turn off, maybe more susceptible to anxiety, which is certainly not going to help with sleep. So if you can try and prioritize your sleep and have a good routine for your sleep, and again, routine can be very difficult in ADHD, but you know, getting some help to put these structures in place can be really helpful. So it's all those holistic things that we know help many aspects of life, and the menopause and perimenopause, to be honest. But I definitely say don't discount the medication. Again, the medication has been given a terrible taboo, and in America at the moment there's been a thing about, oh, it's over prescribed and ADHD is overdiagnosed, and then unfortunately it seems to cloud that everything, doesn't it? And it's not balanced. But you know, the medication is a controlled drug, unfortunately, still, which means you can only get a month's supply at a time, which in itself isn't easy to have to keep remembering to order it. But definitely, I'd always say consider exploring it. At least be knowledgeable about it as an option. Don't be scared of it.
I mean, I think that's really helpful. And look, before I let you go, what, you know, if you've had this diagnosis, we said before, people can often feel a bit embarrassed and they don't want to be labeled. But what would your advice be for perhaps, you know, once you've come to terms with it yourself and you've decided where you're going with your treatment options, how would you explain that diagnosis to perhaps friends, to family members, to colleagues, just so that they're not impacted in their relationships or in the workplace?
That is a very difficult one, because I think there's still a lack of awareness and knowledge about ADHD out there. And I would not say go and necessarily tell everybody about it, because some people just aren't informed and they will get, that it might be negative for you, to be honest. So I would first get some support for yourself, make sure you've got your head around it. There's the ADHD Foundation in the UK. Adult ADHD is another support group and lots of information. And then there's the Attitude magazine, which is American, but it's such an amazing resource. So get your head around it first, and then see who you feel you can trust with it. Because within the medical profession, there's a lack of awareness, let alone within the wider population. And people might make assumptions, and it can, unfortunately, it still can cause judgment and misunderstanding. So I would say start with people who you trust and who you know are the least judgmental people and open-minded people in your life. Start there and slowly build your support network. And as you grow your resilience, you might find you can slowly open up more to more people. But I wouldn't say necessarily to go and tell everybody straight away, because it can affect things like insurance. So it really depends. Your employer depends. Maybe your employer knows about ADHD and they might then be brilliant. But then if they don't and they've got lots of misunderstanding about it, then it could be not a good thing to do. So I'd say get yourself in a good place, sturdy place first. If your loved one or people close to you can read up on it and inform themselves, that makes a massive difference in terms of their understanding and empathy for you. I haven't got a brilliant answer to that one.
I must say that, and I have never been shy of sharing everything about my life. That's what my work is now. I have a son with ADHD, my youngest son, and I want to say to anyone listening, it's absolutely his superpower. He's a musician. There's a reason why he plays the guitar, he sings, he wears headphones a lot. And I never realized till much later on in life that the reason he's chosen that is because that suits his life. He will never be behind a desk. He gets that sensory feedback, and he's very creative. And the reason I mention that is there are so many women who I've met who have actually said to me quite openly, I've got ADHD. That these women are amazing. They're creative. They're coming up with these fantastic ideas. They're shooting from all cylinders. They're real, good people, warm people, as you say, people pleasers, and that should be celebrated rather than sort of crushed and hidden away. So I don't think anyone should feel any shame. Everyone's obviously different, but as you've said, get comfortable with it yourself. Read around it, and we'll, in the show notes afterwards, I'll leave lots of sort of signposting that you've mentioned, so that everybody knows where to go for help. And as I mentioned before, and I'll link it to the Midlife Festival as well, I spoke to Kate Moyesef, who also talks about ADHD. She suffers herself, so she also has a support group. So on that note, where can people obviously find out more about you, Dr. Ping, and the work that you do?
So I see women in my clinic remotely. So I do an online consultation. So I can see women throughout the UK. And I work with Menopause Care. The website is www.menopausecare.co.uk with Dr. Naomi Potter and a team of doctors there. I've got an Instagram feed or a page called Menopause Health Doctor as well, where I do quite a lot of cover quite a lot of ADHD issues. Because like you said, I think spreading the word is always going to help break these negative untruths about it. So I'm trying to spread the word as much as possible so that women are aware.
Well, I think you do an amazing job. And I think what's brilliant about this talk today and what you offer is that in some ways people can come to you for support from both sides, from the sort of hormonal menopause side, but also from the ADHD side, because sometimes you will need to address two, because otherwise, as we've discussed today, you can get into this vicious circle. So thank you so much for joining us. That was so helpful. And for anyone listening, if you're struggling, or if there are any alarm bells ringing or sort of light bulb moments, I'd like to call them, please do get in touch. So take care, and hope you found that helpful. And thanks again, Dr. Ping.
Thanks, Katie.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Lassie Lounge Plus, the online menopause clinic. With thanks to our podcast producer, Emily Crosby Media.